It appears, Brian, that the number of people who have enrolled in Obamacare, as we had mentioned earlier, a lot less than was advertised. And I suspect there's a lot of people in the system now that probably haven't paid. So it's only going to go down. What does that mean? Does that mean that all the rest of us are going to be paying more?
Well, depending on whether or not those were subsidy eligible folks, it really may work in reverse. In other words, we haven't seen any numbers yet, and because it's not going to be a popular number when it's put out there, but how much it's cost taxpayers in this country to subsidize this 8 million or 7.3 million or whatever number it ends up being for their insurance. Once again, in Georgia, the average, we were second lowest in the nation as far as what it costs to buy an insurance policy through the exchange, which unfortunately doesn't say a lot about our economic climate here. It means that obviously we have a lot of folks that are on the low end of the wage scale. So at the end of the day, the average price in Georgia was around $52. That's the average, which means some people were paying obviously less than that. So those folks, if they're enrolled, obviously are costing, those plans should probably cost $300, $400, $500. So there's a huge amount of subsidy going out to folks enrolling in the plan. The issue becomes really down to the carrier and what geographic or demographic makeup they're getting of their employees. And that still was a question. They apparently, according to the administration, received some younger, healthier enrollees at the very end of enrollment due to some advertising, trying to get out to the younger generation. But in general, talking to the carriers that I deal with, they do not get a younger, healthier population. As a matter of fact, some of the large carriers purposefully stayed out of the exchange last year just because they were so fearful of that. They've always before been able to control somewhat the risk that they're bringing on, and with this new system, you don't. So they purposely designed plans to try to deter the unhealthy from coming on to their plan. They want to get a fair share of the new enrollees, but they want the healthy ones. And it's difficult to do. You have to really do it in some very, I guess, mysterious ways, if you want to describe it as that, where these things you won't see on the surface, but you realize some of these plans really don't have very good drug benefits for certain drugs. Those would be drugs to treat very serious health conditions. Or your network is not very strong with doctors that would be there to treat various health conditions. So they're trying to use some subtle changes in their plans to try to guide what kind of enrollees they end up receiving on their plan.
Let me ask both of you this question. There was a lot of talk at the onset that this was a precursor for a single payer system, that 10, 15, however many years down the road, insurance companies would be in such a state that this would be a move. Let me ask you to answer that, Larry, and then I'm going to ask you, Brian.
Well, that's the fear. Let's look at it differently. What's been the result of it? In our area, it's more difficult to get doctors. People don't want to be doctors anymore. Certainly in your primary care areas, they're really hitting it. You go to school till you're 30-something, and you have all this debt because nobody's paying you for that. And then the pay isn't there. So how do you afford to repay that debt and for the lost years of income that you gave up in order to gain those skills? So one of the things is, what's the world going to look like in terms of available doctors? The other thing is, what's going to be available in terms of hospitals? Because right now, the people that don't have any insurance, their insurance is they walk into the emergency room of a hospital and they must be treated. Who pays for that? Well, the people who pay their own bills pay for that. Okay, it's spread among those. Well, as that pool shrinks, the costs keep going up, or the losses of the hospitals start to mount. And we're already seeing hospitals shrink services, shrink numbers of bed, hospitals close, especially in areas that the average pay of the households is lower. So, I mean, we're seeing the entire economic structure of the country being affected, not only from an ability to compete worldwide, the fear of owners, employers to invest in new, doctors not willing to practice, students not willing to go in and become doctors, and hospitals having to close. So if you can find a silver lining of all this, I would love to see it, because I've got a lot of people that have been looking and can't find one.
So then what this means is traveling further to get treatment and waiting in line longer to get it. Is that pretty much
Well,
what?
That's the British system, isn't it? Isn't that where we're headed?
Seems like it. Single payer, Brian, is that, are we on the road to a single payer system?
We talked earlier briefly, and I don't think from a public sentiment standpoint we're any closer. If anything, we may have moved further away after we've seen the federal government's attempt to get involved on the boots on the ground with this website and the rollout of it. Long-term effects, I tend to agree with Larry that the law itself and just the way we're moving is really going to depend on the insurance carriers and what kind of relationship they have. One thing I thought was interesting, one of the larger carriers here in Georgia, between their involvement in Medicare, Medicaid, and now the exchanges through people enrolling, the number one payer of revenue, the number one revenue source for that company is the federal government. Over 50% of their revenue comes from the federal government already. So I think there's probably a little bit of misconception on how far the federal government's already involved in healthcare.
Interesting.
So in their case, they're not a single payer, but they're paying over half of the dollars that come into the company.
Very interesting. Let me just ask you both to sum this up. You people service small business day in and day out, have for years. As you mentioned earlier, a lot of small business people are on edge about, have I done the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? What's going to happen on down the road? I'm afraid to make a decision. Just let me ask you first, Larry. Just sum this up. A small business person out there has these questions. What do you tell them at this point in time? What do you tell them to expect, not only 2015, 2016, and beyond?
Well, the answer is none of us have crystal balls. And they need to sit down with a knowledgeable insurance agent who understands health care. It's not a click and quote business anymore. You really need to sit down with somebody who you can talk to, who understands the law, who can help you translate it to the effect on your business, your employees, so that you can make good decisions.
Very good. Brian?
I think from my perspective, because we're obviously going to do those things when someone comes into our office, the one thing I try to remind the small business folks, especially get really caught up in this, not only from the effect, but really even from a philosophical standpoint, and I have to remind them to run your business. Okay? That comes first. In other words, let's make sure we handle the health care the most efficient way we can. But I had some people that really were coming up with so many ideas and possible options to try to mitigate the effects of the law or avoid the law. I said, if you do that, what's going to happen to your business? Well, I don't know. That's a scary proposition. Run your business, and let's handle this aspect of it the best way we can.
Okay. One last question. There's lots of keeping up to date, making sure you're aware of what these changes are. These are also, I suspect, very costly for small business, aren't they? I mean, as you mentioned, a lot of these people don't have an HR department or somebody to gather all this information.
I don't know that they're paying more from a dollar standpoint, but they're definitely spending a lot more time. And so the time they should be spending, obviously, in other areas of their business, and now having to worry and make extra phone calls to figure out if they're compliant or not compliant. And frankly, I've told our clients up front, when it comes to the insurance, I said, expect to spend more time this year than we ever have. I said, hopefully you like me and I like you, but I'd rather us not have to spend an exorbitant amount of time on this. It shouldn't take this long, but unfortunately this year it's going to.
I bet you two guys have gotten to know each other a whole lot better since Obamacare came down the pike.
Well, we've known each other for a long time, whether before Obamacare. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. I mean, you've made some sense out of a pretty pretty complicated law. Thanks for spending some time with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Larry Winter of Winter and Scoggins CPAs and Brian Peters from Advanced Insurance Strategies. This is Talk Floor TV.